Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Chris, your sneaker professor, back with a book that you guys should definitely pick up and read. Now, I've read a lot of business books, and anytime I come into books about the sneaker industry, it's a little bit different for me because, as you guys know, I own my own sneaker companies. So you walk into it and you have some preconceived ideas. But let's get into the discussion. Here we go. So I wrote the article that you're looking at here on the site, and you can go to the description and click through and check it out. But the article is called Shoe Dog, a memoir by the creator of Nike. It's powerful, but reminds that Nike was created by both hard work and privilege. Now, the uncomfortable aspect of writing a review of a book is that the things you bring to it, you have to put into that review. So I'm going to read it to you guys, and you can follow along. You can put this on in the background and just listen to the discussion, or you can click through and read the article. I read Just Do It by Donald Katz when I was building my sneaker company, Arch. I knew reading about Nike's growth during an important moment in the history of the company could provide insight into running my own sneaker company. As informative as Just Do It was, it didn't necessarily help me in developing a working business plan. I had to grow Arch with very little assistance and guidance. I approached it based on my work with Showshot, which was the company I held a license for and made basketball sneakers and uniforms, and that company taught me a lot about the sneaker industry. My personal experience in the development of Showshot and Arch, it just simply wasn't enough to push me to the end of the 100-meter dash of launching a footwear and apparel business. I was missing very critical components. So the book Just Do It, not Shoe Dog, is a look at Nike from 1989 to 1994. And that was a very turbulent period for Nike where Nike had to recover by being bolstered from the creation of a new segment. So 89 to 94 was about cross-training and tennis. These things helped Nike to capitalize on the newness surrounding the development of a sport. So that book from 89 to 94, that's what it was about. Nike has always been a company operating in what is basically the arena of fast-growing sports. Nike was created because of jogging in the 60s and the 70s. Nike built on the back of the NBA deal and the media deals for the NCAA tournament. So the media from college to professional leagues in the 80s helped to propel Nike even further. And we know that Michael Jordan came along in 84, and the rest is kind of history, but not. Remember, there were layoffs in 85, 86. So those things are all there in Just Do It. The timeliness of Nike's growth gave the brand the ability to constantly introduce new concepts and products. Now, everything about Nike is, you would say it was lucky, but it was not. It was timeliness. Jogging wasn't a thing. There was a book written, and Nike benefited from that book being written by, I think it was a man of war. It was Bill Bowerman. So you have one of the original owners who wrote this book. I'm pretty sure it was Bill Bowerman. That's in here. I can't remember a lot of it. I have marks all the way through this thing, and there's so much information. But it was built by Bill Bowerman. So Nike's always been timely. And because of that, they were able to introduce these new concepts and these new products. So in Just Do It, that book, Nike caught fire with Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders, cross-training. And you think about it, the aerobics craze of the 80s had undercut Nike's momentum in basketball with Air Jordan. Women were buying Reebok Freestyles. They were all over the place. And Adidas got extremely lucky with Run DMC. Those things were jarring to Nike and their growth. Remember, Nike really became a company in 72, but at the end of the 70s, they were fighting for their lives. And I'll get to that a little bit later. But Nike and the swoosh had to adjust to the Reebok Freestyle and Adidas and Run DMC. So the rise of professional multi-sport athletes allowed for an entirely new segment and category. And just as Bo and Deion Sanders recaptured the imagination of the U.S., Andre Agassi became iconic. Michael Jordan began winning championships. Charles Barkley was not a role model. And Magic Johnson retired because of HIV, and that caused Converse to fall off. Just Do It, that book covered that moment in time. And it couldn't help me because it didn't help me understand the real history of Nike. So with Just Do It, that was a different, more business-based approach than swoosh. Now, swoosh, the unauthorized, and I'm clicking here so you guys can see it, of Nike and the men who played there, it read like fiction. It was hands down one of the best books I've ever read. But that's because Rob Strasser's, who's a former Nike man from the early days, his wife wrote the book. In Shoe Dog, Phil Knight talks about not apologizing to Rob Strasser, who died of a heart attack. And then in the book, he also talks about the full circle moment of hiring Rob Strasser's daughter. Now that takes me off topic. Swoosh, this book, Rob Strasser by J.B. Strasser. This book gives incredible insight into the culture of Nike and how the company has come to so thoroughly dominate the sportswear market. But it was only written up to the 80s. And that's why I read Just Do It. But swoosh was written up until the 80s. But it's still a second-hand discussion, right? Swoosh was the best book written about Nike until Shoe Dog. And that only makes sense. Phil Knight was the writer of a thesis at Stanford Business School that seemed like a long shot, the crazy idea. Knight's manifesto on building a sneaker company was written at a time when entrepreneurship was not the cool thing for a college graduate to pursue. Knight's background as an accountant is what seemed like the logical approach to life, and that's what Phil Knight did initially. Not as an accountant. He worked at I think it was Waterhouse, until he decided to take time to travel abroad. That's where this book kind of begins. Shoe Dog isn't a book that could have helped me to build a sneaker company. That's not what this is. It couldn't have helped me. It might help you, but it couldn't have helped me. I'm no longer chasing the dream of owning a sneaker company. I stopped. I gave almost 14 years attempting to become the next Nike or Under Armour. I very rarely had anyone who wanted to help me out. I worked alone. And I was a little bit too soon, as Instagram has allowed 1 million small brands to pop up since 2016. What I learned, though, through my challenges is that timing is everything. Timing was critical in the creation of Nike. But what became painfully evident for me reading Shoe Dog, as a black man reading this book, is that until Instagram, and this is important, and TikTok arrived, and social media helped slightly at Facebook, but it wasn't the way Instagram and TikTok have been for a lot of new small companies. with Arch and Show Shot, had very little chance to be successful, although I was pretty good with Show Shot. But I had very little chance to elevate and scale those businesses. That's just not the way it was going to work, at least for me. Now, that's not knocking anybody else, because we know right now you have Somewhere in America and all of these different companies that are in existence now because Instagram has become a fantastic equalizer. Shoe Dog is a beautifully written book about the foundation of Nike from 1962 to when Nike versus Onitsuka, the company that basically started Blue Ribbon Sports, was completed, right? And then Nike had to battle the U.S. government and lobbyists to save their company from a $25 million tax bill, the American selling price. And I had never heard of that until this book. That tax bill would have destroyed Nike. There would not have been a Nike had not Phil Knight's lawyers, his teams, got together and written a paper and went to the government to fight. And this is where a company like a business like FDRA, an organization like FDRA comes into play, who's in the government fighting against tariffs and things set in place by the previous administration. But that takes us a little bit off topic. And I hope you guys are like, yo, you know what? This is a good listen, man. You got it on in the background. You're listening to it. And I hope it's all making sense as we go. I'm getting to my points about Shoe Dog. All right. But that American selling price for Nike, after Nike had just come out of a lawsuit with Onitsuka, that's still getting us ahead. So let's keep going. Shoe Dog is Phil Knight penning what feels like an ode to his life. There's a moment there that discusses the tragedy of his son's death, but it's very brief. Throughout the text, morality mortality is a clock in a mirror with hands made of our own eyes, the wrinkles and skin and hair turning gray. Each day, these hands show the effects of time, and we understand that soon we won't see the last sweep of the second hand, or in Phil Knight's case, the last second on the clock in a sporting event. What Shoe Dog was, for me, was a discussion, not on mortality for Phil Knight and the rise of Nike. It was a discussion in why less privileged people very rarely create billion-dollar businesses. Having read Swoosh and Just Do It, I walked into the reading of Shoe Dog with a bias. I know that the company Nissho probably would have never worked with a black man. I knew that Phil Knight began this business with friends and associates, and none of those people were black. When I was making Show Shot and building Show Shot and Arch, I was attempting to read business books rooted in privilege. Reading from this position sucks because you end up tick marking. You see red marks throughout the book. You end up tick marking every moment that shows you why you can't do something. Instead of taking the book and reading between the lines and pulling knowledge from the details you can mimic. The instances of privilege in Shoe Dog, though, are striking. And they're mentioned in almost, and I hate to say this, thoughtless manner. The language is so matter of fact, and it's just written so straightforward. But I'm going to give you instances from the book. And I'm not going to give away the book. If you've heard the story of Nike, you've kind of heard it and you know what's going on. You get it. But I was writing and putting notes in the book everywhere. And initially, that's what I was doing, was putting notes, because these moments of privilege just jumped out at me like it's just smacking me. Because the language is so straightforward. So here we go. I put down 8 instances that jumped out at me. At the start of the book, when Knight discusses his crazy idea on page 11, he states, "I need my father's approval. More, I need his cash." His father was the publisher of the Oregon Journal. On page 13, his father agreed to a trip Phil Knight would take to travel around the world. And this is what he said: "A trip might be just the finishing touch to my education." Knight on his trip would bring along a friend, a companion from his Stanford graduate school. Knight asked his friend, days later, his friend Carter got the okay from his parents, plus a loan from his father. In the book, at this moment, I realized the opportunity Phil Knight had at a time, 1962. Black people couldn't vote. And we were in a decade where our greatest leaders of the civil rights era would be assassinated and murdered. It's not Phil Knight's fault, but it jumps out at you when you read it. Now, Knight and his friends stayed in places around the world. They stopped in Hawaii and decided to remain in Hawaii for a while. They even landed jobs there that would allow them to surf all day and work at night. They left that job where they were selling encyclopedias and landed jobs at Investors Overseas Services selling securities. Now, it should be stated that opportunity arrives because of preparation, and Knight had an MBA. That's not privilege. That's hard work. He earned that MBA. But consider the ability to move to Hawaii on your parents' dime after graduating with your master's. You surf and sell books and then land a job at a securities firm. Then when you get tired of that position at the securities firm and that place in Hawaii, you move on to Japan, only 20 years removed from World War II. And catch this, on page 22, we learn, luckily, this is a quote from Phil Knight, "My father knew people in Tokyo, including American guys working at United Press International." The trip to Japan is what led to the founding of Blue Ribbon Sports, which did not exist when he got to Japan. But it was the crazy idea from his master's thesis. So think about the moves from Portland to Hawaii to Japan, where ex-GIs would assist Phil Knight in meeting with the heads of Onitsuka. ASICS now, Onitsuka Tiger. Now think about the fact that Knight got this meeting and he didn't even have a name for the sneaker company in his thesis. In the meeting, he had to make it up on the spot. He had to make up the name Blue Ribbon Sports on the spot. That's not privilege. That's ingenuity. Privilege is about being able to finish the meeting and land a deal with Onitsuka to import running shoes, and being able to call your father to have money wired to Onitsuka to pay for a shipment of shoes. Privilege is continuing a journey that took Phil Knight from Bangkok to Vietnam to Kathmandu and then to wandering the streets of Bombay on New Year's Eve, 1962. From there, Knight then went on to Kenya and Cairo, And think about this. Imagine the ability in the 1960s to visit countries and experience the world. Young black people at that time were doing freedom rides and waiting on President Kennedy to initiate the Civil Rights Act. Knight was basically continuing his journey in the same year, 1963, that Medgar Evers, an Army vet like Knight, an activist, was killed, assassinated in his driveway, fighting for rights for black folks. Phil Knight went on to Istanbul, Milan, and Paris. This is not diminishing Phil Knight. This is only juxtaposing the life, the reality of the 60s. As Knight finished up his travels and returned home, he was able to meet with the CEO of Pacific Power and Light, who informed Phil Knight to get his CPA. Knight enrolled at Portland State to earn his CPA. That's not privilege, that's hard work. In 1964, after being in school again, Phil Knight got a shipment from Onitsuka and sold out of the shoes. He ordered 900 more. He didn't have any money. So his father gave him a letter of guarantee and sent him to the First National Bank of Oregon. And on the strength of my father's reputation, Phil Knight, and nothing more, the bank approved the loan. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act had finally passed. At the same time, Phil Knight had gotten a loan to ramp up his Blue Ribbon sports business. The following year, Malcolm X was assassinated, was murdered. 65. All of these things don't diminish the work Phil Knight did. He still had to organize and scrape to find money again and again. He had to build a team. The people around him supported him and did incredible work. Employee number 2, Jeff Johnson, moved from coast to coast. The team of lawyers and accountants helped Blue Ribbon transition to Nike in 1972. Phil Knight was able to capture lightning and harness it. Was he privileged? Definitely. Is that all I got from reading this book? Not at all. I realized that starting a business requires a tremendous amount of help and a lot of luck. But most important, it requires preparation. Shoe Dog reminded me that having a crazy idea is easy. Bringing that crazy idea to fruition requires money and connections. And even then, success is not a guarantee. Today, the world is much smaller. Throughout the 60s, Phil Knight built Blue Ribbon Sports. At the same time Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, schools were still being integrated. 4 little girls were murdered by the Ku Klux Klan in a church bombing. Nike turned 50 years old this week. There's celebrations taking place. 2 weeks ago, Patrick Lyoya was shot in the back of the head by cops in Grand Rapids. Nike is a $50 billion company at 50 years old. I read a book about how this company overcame financial difficulties and the owner dealt with tragedy. But in the back of my mind, I understood this. The sneaker culture that I love so much was created by privileges a person the same age but a different race could have never created. The book is good. This is the week that Nike's celebrating their 50th anniversary. This quote on the page, if you've learned anything from the past, is that we're in for one hell of a future. It's from Phil Knight, and it has an original sketch of the Nike swoosh, probably pulled from the archives. At the same time, we have to understand that creating something is the most difficult thing that we all can be a part of and take on. But we also have to recognize there's a lot of privilege that comes along with the creation of some of these businesses. Let's admire Nike for what it is. Read the book and let's understand how difficult the process of creating a multi-billion-dollar business is, or even $1,000 business. But know at the root of it, sometimes it's not your fault if you fall a little bit short. Learn how not to be so hard on yourself and recognize that everybody needs help. We all need a little bit of assistance. There's no such thing as pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It's a lie. We work hard, and with a little luck, a whole bunch of opportunity, and a bunch of money, you can accomplish some great things, but sometimes you won't. It's my review of Shoe Dog. It's a long video. I know it is. Appreciate you guys for watching, who stayed this whole time. Hopefully I didn't ruin the book for you, and you will go and pick it up. I'll see you guys on the next one. Wu-Tang.